You might have read in my bio that I'm actually a student here at the University of Regina. I'm at the Johnson Shoyama School. And I've been really passionate recently, for about the past year or so, about this relationship between social media and public policy. For a variety of reasons. I mean, there's a lot going on, obviously, in the world. We've already heard about some examples here, but if we think of the Arab Spring, we think of what happened in Montreal, there's been riots in London, all seem to be facilitated by this social media thing going on. But really, the reason why I enjoy this particular, why I want to learn about social media and public policy is that it gives me an opportunity to play with Tinkertoys. It really does. And I don't know, I might be dating myself here, but my kids would just love this stuff. I mean, he was playing Renee was playing with this for hours. But I don't actually play with Tinkertoys. What I do is I look at social relationships and how they break apart, and I try to measure them in certain ways. And the way you might measure them, is that you have all these wheels, and these might be people, organizations, they might be concepts, ideas, institutions, laws, all these sorts of kind of things. And then there's these pieces in the centers here that connect the ideas here, or people. And you can do a lot of fun, really weird, strange computational things that I hope to share with you later on in this talk. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about being a librarian. And this is Rochelle. She's a good friend of mine. She's actually not your stereotypical librarian. I can't imagine her shushing anybody. But she plays a really good one on the internet, so I presented her here. And if you were to ask me what is the superpower of a librarian, and I know there's actually librarians in the audience today, what is the superpower of the really, really good librarian? My answer would be they actually don't know very much. They're good at pretending it. They know how to connect ideas and connect people to information, but they actually don't know a whole lot. They just have a really good way of. And what does this mean? I want to share with you what happens when a group of librarians, people who don't know a lot, actually engage in public policy and try to transform something in a city. And in this case, it was actually a previous task that I was given to promote a consultation process for a large central public library in the middle of Halifax. It was a $55 million project, and we wanted to engage people as much as possible. And one of the key things that we were going to do was something called a yarn bomb. I don't know if people are familiar with yarn bombing, but it's kind of a kinder, gentler graffiti, if you want to say. You don't actually damage the property, but you can actually knit something over top of it and still make a point. And sometimes these are some interesting examples. And the thing about doing this yarn bomb activity, we wanted to make sure that the public was engaged in the consultation process, even in the invitation of the process. So even before we certainly wanted to engage people in how the library was going to be built, but we also wanted to engage them in the actual inviting people to the consultation for the Central Library. And how do we do that? Well, we invited some people into a bar. We shared some beers. We learned how to knit. At least 4 people on that day actually learned how to knit for this yarn bomb. Some were experts, some were not. And we asked people to kind of create as much as possible, little sheets, I actually asked for 10 by 10 squares, but not everybody was a good knitter, so we ended up with kind of weird, odd shapes, which were actually quite fun for the knitters to kind of fit. It was kind of like Legos. It was quite fun. And so we engaged all these people kind of in this, and this is what the actual final product looked like. It's kind of fun. Something about this is that it's actually in a tree. That tree, for scope, is about 3 feet wide. So pi times diameter, it's about 9 feet. That piece was actually 9 feet large and about 8 feet high. For scope, if you think of maybe Shaquille O'Neal, he probably couldn't hug that tree completely around. So that's a very big tree, and I was quite proud of this piece. And it was also located in the spot where the current Central Library is actually being built at this stage. So it was one of the purposes of it was that it would animate the space. People could come to the space where the new Central Library was going to be found. We took little pieces of yarn attached some little cards to it and invited people to the space. So they would go to the tree, see the card, grab it, and then they could find out where to go for the consultation. There were 5 of these meetings. They all covered different topics. If you want to go look at them, halifaxcentrallibrary.ca. And all the meeting things, they were quite successful. And again, speaking to this idea of librarians knowing nothing, we began with the idea there was no design, even at the start, or very just strange ideas, just some ideas of design. The architects actually didn't have a design before we actually had people engaged in the conversation. And you'll also notice these are people conversing with each other instead of a librarian or an architect kind of telling people what's going on. So again, it's this process of not knowing, of not really knowing a whole lot and wanting to connect people so that we can learn together. That I think is a really key advantage of the number of librarians who are involved in this process. Librarians, library workers, all kinds of people. Between the meetings, we wanted to make sure that we continued the conversation. So we did a number of extra projects as well. So we had some pumpkin keep people, let people know about it. This actually happened after those 5. There was another consultation meeting. But we also kind of put some chalkboard, let people talk about what they felt about their new library. But the most exciting and the most rewarding piece was actually the tree. What happened after the first meeting, of course, invitations were irrelevant. I needed to take the invitations off the tree, and I awaited the copy for the second invitations. So there were basically all these empty clothespins on the tree that had no use. Well, the public actually decided to make a use for them. And there was a local candy store who decided, wouldn't it be cool if I put some candy on the tree to promote my shop? So we put a couple of little lollipops on that tree. Okay, that's kind of interesting, kind of using our space, but whatever. Hey, get away from. But then what actually happened after that was that somebody actually wrote a note saying, "Hey, thanks for the candy." Okay, thanks for the candy. And what transpired throughout this whole piece, I actually ended up having to build pockets for this little yarn piece, is that we had a whole bunch of drawings, cartoons, were all attached to these little pieces of clothespins, basically on a tree, just simply because it was there, and it invited people into a space to connect to each other and understand what was going on. And just for kind of scope, this is actually what the design ended up looking like for the Halifax Central Library. Again, it's on that space. And this is where it is. This was, I did this yesterday. This is a screenshot of the library as it stands today. So it's actually being constructed as we speak. Now, to top all this off, wouldn't it be really cool if somehow that tree went viral? Wouldn't it be really, really cool? Well, the truth is it did. A friend of mine, Craig Moore, created a video, and we ended up, I was there kind of in my little jacket. It was 5 in the morning. I had actually been up all night trying to sew those things together. And we did a video of us kind of installing the piece in the tree, and it ended up having 200,000 hits. But the interesting thing about this is that the consultations were already over. The tree was down. It didn't exist anymore. The rain actually killed it, so that thing ended up looking like basically a ratty rag. And I had removed that, and also that experience of all those notes, and I mean 2 full bags of notes is what I ended up at the end of the summer. We're there. Something you need to notice also about this particular sheet, look at the likes and dislikes. Right? We weren't that popular necessarily on the internet. It was not too bad. I've seen worse. We weren't Friday or Rebecca Black. It's okay. But we weren't as popular as you might think about what a viral video would be like. What happened is that we ended up on the front page of the Google page, and people were like, what's this piece of yarn on a tree? And we had all kinds of different comments. Apparently I was a hippie, and apparently we should have given the fabric to homeless people, and otherwise, when it gets cold, homeless people will fight over the fabric, and this will become a news story, as if. But YouTube generally, as we know, doesn't necessarily have that great a reputation for comments. But it does make me wonder why this disconnect. Why is there this disconnect between the experience that seemed to happen on the tree versus what happened online? There seemed to be some kind of issue of translation. It didn't seem to translate quite well. And so back to my Tinkertoys. I was able to reflect on this using my little bit of math and computational stuff. And what things you can do once you've connected all the dots, based on how information travels through this network, we can kind of come up with communities. You can use math and mathematics to kind of figure out, okay, who's connected together, who's talking to who. And in this particular case, we had the tree, the YouTuber commenters, the candy store. We had the actual formal process of the consultation itself, and then knitters in a bar, I guess you could call it. And all these groups needed to somehow translate to each other. Now I want to raise the stakes a little bit on this topic because I did say I was going to talk about public policy, and I want to talk about Tunisia and the what they call a Jasmine Revolution, one of the early sparks of the Arab Spring. Dégage, just in case you're wondering, actually means get out, scram. It's a way French people say to go. So as you may or may not know, there was a revolution in Tunisia, and Ben Ali was actually finally turfed from office. And I took an account of a scholar named Maria Paradiso, and she wrote a paper on how WikiLeaks sparked or helped to spark the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia. And the story that you hear maybe on the news and in this piece is that WikiLeaks released a number of diplomatic cables, some confidential diplomatic cables. This exposed a number of government officials in Tunisia and in other places as involved in corruption and a number of different activities. Protests resulted. Unfortunately, Bouzidi, who's mentioned there, during the protest set himself on fire, which sparked a very large-scale protest. There were clashes with police, public square, and one of the things that was very interesting about this particular protest is that it basically went viral on the internet as well, and it was released to the mass public. A lot of people heard about it, and it also spread to areas because of that kind of mass public appeal. It spread to Egypt, it spread to Libya, it spread to Yemen, Syria, and Morocco. And these were all kind of serious protests. Now, doing my little math thing, you can look at the pink there. The pink on this thing is kind of a little bit of an online kind of group, community. And then you have the green piece, which is kind of this, maybe the offline community, or the protesters, or the public space or community, activist community. And then there's this other kind of community that seems to be out on the side, and it's this story about Bouzidi himself, food vendors, and the international food supply. Now, why is that interesting? Well, it begs the question, why were people protesting in the first place? And certainly one of the reasons, corruption was definitely played a role, but one of the reasons was the fact that food prices had increased by over 50% in that small period, the actual same period when I was knitting yarn on a tree by chance. The red piece is the Jasmine Revolution, and just for comparison, the blue piece is actually the beginnings of the Occupy movement. Now, why did food prices increase? Well, I have to ask. Basically, some policies in North America, Europe, as well, encouraged the removal of, or the moving of land for food to land for energy. So we actually had a decrease of supply of food because we had moved towards energy. So the question is, there's this whole piece around that story provided by Maria Paradiso about WikiLeaks, about how important online internet connection, but we seem to miss, this story tends to get lost in the fray. So I guess I just asked the question again, and I'm going to leave you with that question, why this disconnect? And maybe true librarian, I'm going to say I don't actually know, and I hope to find out. But the thing that I think is important is that I can help connect people to ideas, some of these ideas, and I think you can too. And I guess that's the story. That's my story of this yarn bomb and why it matters to public policy. Thanks.